Hi, and welcome to One Life Matters, the podcast that reminds you that your life is worth living with purpose, joy, and authenticity. I'm Trish, a counsellor and life coach, and I'll be sharing down-to-earth conversations, insights, and tools to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. Whether you're healing from the past, finding your confidence, or simply wanting to feel more at peace with yourself, this is your space. Because you only get one life and it truly matters. Just before we get into this episode, I just want to mention that this podcast is for general information, insight, and reflection only. It's not a substitute for personal therapy, counselling, or medical advice. In today's podcast, I want to talk about something that all of us experience but don't always understand: overthinking. You know that feeling where your mind just won't switch off? You overplay conversations, you analyse every little thing you said, what they might have meant, what they might have thought you meant, and imagine every possible outcome. And it's usually the worst possible outcome. And no matter how much you think about it, you don't actually feel any better. In fact, you very often feel much worse. The thing about overthinking is that it's an equal opportunity hijacker. It doesn't care if it's a big life crisis or because someone didn't leave any X's on the end of a text. Once that loop starts, your brain is no longer your own. It's like a drop of ink in a glass of water. It starts small, but it can spread quickly and contaminate everything. Before you know it, that tiny thought has turned into a mental fog that ruins your entire day and keeps you awake at night. And it convinces you with absolute terrifying certainty that you're permanently stuck in this glitch and it will never get any better. And I can't tell you how many times a client has sat across from me and asked how to find the off switch, as if overthinking is some sort of moral failing or a structural flaw in their character. There's this heavy sense of shame, like they're weak because they just can't stop it. It can cause so much worry, anxiety, and dread. But the reality is, you're not flawed and your brain isn't broken. It's just over-functioning. It's trying to protect you by trying really hard to solve a problem that usually doesn't even exist. And even if it did, 9 times out of 10, it's never as catastrophic as your thoughts are insisting it is. The hardest part when you're in the grip of overthinking is remembering that your brain is currently a highly unreliable storyteller. And it amps up the drama because that's what it thinks its job is. And that's not a weakness. It's just a very exhausted, very loud biological survival mechanism on a power trip. So let's take a look at what overthinking actually is, other than just thinking a lot. Overthinking is actually something quite specific. It's when your thoughts become repetitive, intrusive, and also difficult to switch off. Overthinking, despite what you might think, isn't problem solving. It really isn't. Problem solving has an outcome. It moves you forward. Overthinking keeps you stuck. Round and round, same thoughts, different angles, but no real solution. It's like being on a mental hamster wheel. You're moving, but you're not actually getting anywhere. And often the thoughts themselves can be really brutal. They can be fueled by anger and frustration, where you might feel a strong sense of injustice. Your brain feels wronged, so it hijacks your thoughts to seek a resolution, even if the event is already over. You create this internal dialogue, having a go at yourself for not saying what you should have said or overthinking what you're gonna say, winding yourself right up. The result is that you end up in a power loop where you're mentally trying to win an argument that will probably never happen or might have happened 4 days ago, leaving you physically exhausted and still fuming. Then there's fear and anxiety fueled by the brain's survival instinct, trying to scan the future for landmines. It assumes that If it catastrophizes and thinks about every possible disaster, it can somehow be prepared and prevent them. Your internal dialogue might sound like, what if they don't reply? If they don't reply, it means they're pissed off. If they're pissed off, I'll lose my job. And if I lose my job, I can't pay the rent. I need to check my email again. Did I sound desperate in that last message? Oh God, now I've screwed everything up. And this can result in a state of analysis paralysis, where the fear of making the wrong move is so strong, it prevents you from making any move at all. And what about embarrassment and shame? Probably the worst of them all. Have you ever had the cringe overthinking experience? It's fueled by the fear of social exclusion. Your brain replays a low-light reel of your most embarrassing or regretful moments, making you wish you could turn back time in an attempt to teach you to never do them again. And how many of us have said the morning after the night before, I'm never drinking again? You think everyone is talking about you and saying what an absolute idiot, waste of space, or bad person, or whatever you are, not knowing how you're ever going to show your face again. Even if you had a great time, you'll transfix on that one tiny thing, contaminating how you feel about the whole experience. Overthinking fueled by the heavy weight of perfectionism is something I see a lot in my therapy room. It's this deep-seated belief that there's a proper or correct way to exist, a perfect version of yourself that you're supposed to be. When you fall even an inch short of that mythical mark, your brain hijacks your focus and forces you to obsess over every perceived failing, every wrong word, and every flawed decision. It becomes an obsession. You aren't just thinking about a problem anymore. You're interrogating your own character. You get stuck in this loop where you're trying to think your way into being perfect, but all you're actually doing is contaminating your present moment with a past you can't change and a standard you were never meant to meet. It's exhausting, it's demoralizing, and it convinces you that you're broken, when really you're just holding yourself to a standard that doesn't exist. Now, I want to also mention the digital elephant in the room: social media and text messaging. These platforms are absolute high octane fuel for overthinking. I mean, we've all been there, right? Holding phones like they're unexploded bombs, waiting for those three little dots to appear, while our brain convinces us that our entire relationship is hanging by a thread, all because of a missing emoji. In a real conversation, I can see your smile or hear the warmth in your voice, but in a text, that safety net is gone, and oh my word, can things get misinterpreted. Suddenly, a missing X at the end of a message isn't just a typo. To an overthinking brain, it can feel like a complete rejection or a declaration of war. And I've got to be honest, I've been there myself. If John doesn't put at least one kiss on the end of his text, I notice it immediately, and I even text back asking where my kisses are. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm hearing how crazy I sound. You start to spiral. They didn't put a kiss. They usually put a kiss. Are they annoyed? Did I say something earlier? Let me scroll back through the last 3 days of messages to see where the tone shifted. And you end up searching for clues to a problem that probably doesn't even exist. Whether it's a romantic partner or a close friend, the missing response or the blue ticks and no reply can easily become an unnecessary contamination. You're not just looking at a screen anymore, you're looking at a void, a silently loud negative message, and your brain is filling that void with your deepest fears. It can hijack your entire day. You can't focus properly on anything because you're too busy mentally decoding a 2-word text that in reality was probably just sent by someone who was rushing for the loo and hasn't given it another thought. Or you might notice a specific friend hasn't liked or commented on your post or reel, and the spiral begins. You start to weigh the digital silence against the history of the friendship, convinced that their lack of a double tap is a quiet signal that the relationship is cooling off, or they're annoyed with you. It can be incredibly damaging because you start to overthink and create a negative version of the friendship that only exists in your head. You might start acting differently towards them, perhaps becoming guarded or matching their energy by pulling back, all based on an imagined shift that might just be because they're busy or in a rush and they just haven't had time to give a more thought out response. This digital overthinking contaminates real world connection, replacing genuine intimacy with a frantic need for validation that a screen was never meant to provide. So, I want to take this a little deeper now and look at why we overthink and where does it come from. We don't do it because we enjoy it, but because on some level, overthinking can feel safe. It's a way of your brain trying to protect you because somewhere along the line, your system learnt that being alert, being careful, and hyper aware helped you to avoid pain. So your brain developed a strategy. If I think this through enough, I'll be prepared. If I analyse it enough, I won't get caught off guard. If I predict every possible outcome, I can stop something bad from happening. It's quite clever, really, when you think about it. But here's the problem. Life isn't predictable, and no amount of thinking can fully protect you from discomfort, rejection, or uncertainty. So instead of making you feel safe, overthinking keeps your nervous system in a constant state of alert. It's like your mind is always scanning for danger, even when there isn't any. For a lot of people, overthinking has roots in earlier experiences. It might come from growing up in an environment where you had to read the room, be careful what you said. You felt responsible for other people's emotions. Maybe things felt unpredictable and unsafe. So you learn to stay one step ahead. You learn to anticipate, to analyze, and to think your way to safety. While that kept you safe in childhood, it can follow you into adulthood and become a maladaptive coping mechanism, especially in relationships. You might find yourself overanalyzing messages, worrying about how you're perceived, replaying conversations over and over again, and needing a lot of reassurance, and not because you're needy, but because your system is trying to protect you from feeling rejected, misunderstood, judged, feeling bad, ashamed, embarrassed, not good enough. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But even though overthinking is trying to help, it actually creates a hell of a lot of stress because instead of calming your mind, it fuels anxiety. The more you think, the more evidence your brain seems to find, and more often than not, the story it tells you leans towards the negative. Because, as I've mentioned in so many of my previous podcasts, your brain is wired for survival, not happiness. So it scans for what can go wrong, and before you know it, you've built a whole story in your mind that more than likely isn't even true. Overthinking also disconnects you from the rest of your body, from your intuition, from that quieter, steadier, wiser inner voice of reason, because your head is so loud and takes up all the space. You lose that quiet, steady part of yourself, and this is where you feel you can't trust your own judgment anymore, unsure of what's right, and feeling stuck in this never-ending overthinking loop. That's the impact of living too much in your head. You lose connection with other parts of yourself that can help you take a breath, step back, and regulate. And one of the biggest traps with overthinking is that it feels productive, like you're actually doing something, figuring it all out. But actually, what you're doing is trying to control something that can't be controlled. You're trying to think yourself into certainty, and well, certainty is something we rarely get in life. So the mind keeps going and going and going, looking for an answer that never quite arrives. And that's emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausting. So I want to offer you a different way of thinking about this. What if overthinking isn't really the problem, but more the signal? A signal that something inside you doesn't feel safe, that your system is trying to protect you from something. When you start to see it in that way, You can respond with curiosity instead of frustration. And instead of saying, "Why am I like this?" you might ask yourself, "What am I trying to protect myself from right now?" And that's a very different conversation. And this leads me on to ways of managing it and what actually helps. Now, I'm not going to tell you to just stop thinking. If it was that easy, you'd have done it already. No, this is about learning to relate differently to your thoughts. First of all, name it, because the first step is awareness. Simply noticing, "I'm overthinking right now." It might sound small and obvious, but it really is a powerful step towards managing your thoughts. You see, it creates a bit of space between you and the thought. You're not in it, you're observing it, which gives you the breathing room you need to begin to take back control. Now, the next move is get out of your head and back into your body, because overthinking can't survive there. It needs the noise of your mind to keep going. By just taking a few slow breaths, stretching, or feeling your feet firm on the floor, you're sending a physical signal to your brain that the emergency is over. It's nothing fancy, but it's the quickest way to remind your nervous system that you're actually okay and you're safe right here in this moment. Then try setting a boundary with your mind, and this is one most people often struggle with, but it's really important. Your thoughts don't get to run the show 24/7. You can tell yourself, "Okay, I've thought about this for long enough now. I'll come back to it later." Then redirect your focus. Will your mind wander off again? Yeah, probably, but that's okay. Just keep bringing it back to the present, and by doing this repeatedly, you're strengthening your focus muscle. It's not about being perfect. Again, it's about you taking back some control. If you find that you really do need to think something through, strike a deal and give it a container. Literally tell yourself that you'll set aside a specific time, maybe 15 minutes, and let your mind do what it will. And when that time is up, you pull the plug and you close the door on it. This helps your brain learn that it doesn't need to overthink all day long. I saw a good friend recently, and overthinking came up in conversation. And she asked me how to deal with it. And I mentioned how, when things feel heavy, try to take a step back and just observe the story your mind is spinning. We're all natural-born narrators, but our brains aren't always honest. They fib quite a lot, and God, do they love to lean into a dramatic story. I told her to try not to lean into that narrative. If a thought feels overwhelming, just to remind yourself that feelings aren't facts. And just because those relentless thoughts make you feel crap or whatever, doesn't mean any of it's true. Just know these stories are there and let them drift past without jumping in and playing the main character. Just be part of the audience. If your mind was loud today, know that you're far from alone. And please know that it's only because it's trying so hard to protect you. But maybe now it's time to update that strategy, to show your nervous system and to prove to yourself that you can be safe without analysing every tiny detail, without preparing for every possible outcome and living your life entirely in your head, exhausting yourself in the process. Give yourself permission to leave the puzzles unsolved. You are allowed to rest, even while the questions are still up in the air. Be as kind to yourself as you would be to a dear friend or loved one, because life is far too short to become trapped in the exhausting web of overthinking. And you deserve peace of mind. And in the words of Vicky King, overthinking is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Thank you for joining me on One Life Matters. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love you to subscribe and maybe share it with someone who might need it too. And remember, you only get one life, so make it one that truly matters. Until next time, take care of yourself.